Okay, I think the recording has started, so I'll hand it to the chair.
Thank you, Naz. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Ajda Obat, Cabinet Member for Communities, and I've got my co-chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hannah Hayes, I'm Superintendent for Haringey.
So welcome to the Community Safety Partnership meeting. This is the last meeting before the pre-election period starts. Please note that this meeting is being recorded for live and subsequent broadcast by the Council's internet side. Before we move on, if everyone could just introduce themselves briefly, just their name and their role. I'll start with Will.
Hi, I'm Will Maymaris. I'm Director of Public Health for Haringey.
I'm Charlie Martin, I'm a Public Health Registrar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Elana Sitzler, Hate Crime Lead for Haringey Council. Everyone, Ellie Gurling, I'm Strategic Lead for Communities, Prevent Lead for Haringey Council.
Carl Sutton, Corporate Director for Adults, Housing and Health.
Mark Wolski, Head of Community Safety.
Hi there, Sandy Broke, Intelligence Manager, Community Safety. Nazir Chowdhury, Democratic Services and Clerks of the meeting.
Thank you, and I'll go online. Adam.
Adam Brown, ASB, CCTV and Enforcement Manager at Haringey Council.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, hi everyone. Barry Parkes, I'm Corporate Director for Environment and Resident Experience.
Thank you, Jackie.
Hi everyone, Jackie Tafalco, Director for Early Help Prevention and SEND, and have Youth Justice Service in my portfolio.
Thank you, Joe.
Afternoon, everybody. Joe Bemmer, I'm the Strategic Lead for Integrated Offender Management and Community Safety.
Thank you. Jude.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jude Nerona and I'm from Victim Support.
Thank you, Amanda.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Lunnis, Senior Probation Officer here on behalf of Cynthia Kemp, who's Head of Service for Enfield and Haringey Probation.
Thank you. And finally, Nahara.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nihara Wajase, Assistant Director for Housing Management.
Thank you. Just to say, I'm mindful of time, so if we could keep questions to the ends of the presentations, each presentation, and to just introduce yourself when you're asking a question. Okay, so next item.
So obviously we're all aware that this meeting is being filmed and recorded for the council. Do we have any apologies as well for this meeting?
We have no apologies, Chair.
Is everyone happy to be filmed for this meeting?
Any urgent business?
No urgent business reported.
So in regards to the matters being discussed, are there any declarations of interest? No.
Do any members have any comments on the CSP minutes held on the 22nd of October 2025? Great, so I'll take the minutes from the 22nd of October as agreed.
Okay, and do we have anybody being added to the membership at all or changed?
I have a comment, Chairs. There are some people who are missing, and I know we haven't submitted or haven't received apologies. Take them outside the meeting. That's what.
I understand Dan Rogers from the Haringey Community Collaborative is formally to be added to the membership, so if that can be noted.
So the action tracker in terms of reference. So Mark,
Thank you, Chairs. So I'm going to help you through the meeting through a PowerPoint presentation, so we ensure we keep all our actions on track and so forth. I don't propose to go through every single action within this pack. One, because it'll challenge my eyesight on my small screen here. But secondly, it's a matter of time as well. You'll see the top half, there's some amber and some blue actions to be tracked, and they are not due at this stage yet. They talk to the need for a new strategic needs assessment and so forth for the year 2027. I go down to the middle of the screen there. The first action is in relation to the antisocial behaviour strategic group. That did take place in January. A good representation from across partnership agencies and also from a number of residential social landlords. Next meeting of that is due to take place in April. The main focus of that next meeting will be about victim care, what it means to be a victim of antisocial behaviour. Following action below that, in relation to, I'm struggling with my eyesight here, so just zoom in slightly there, the PPSG. That's complete in actual fact. There's been a change and that will be subject to discussion under the agenda item. Then hate crime, the Markfield Park graffiti initiative, that's in train, and that will be subject to discussion and update in the agenda. In relation to hate crime in terms of response rates, so that's like there. And investigating the reasons for the low recording rates. So there's been some action in relation to that, and I'm going to talk to that as an agenda item as well. So I'll go to the next slide, some further actions. Just a couple of actions there in relation to the violence against women and girls agenda. The one which is marked red at the moment was an action in relation to developing a dashboard. Some work has been undertaken. There's some proposed KPIs to be spoken to, and they are contained in the pack as well. In relation to the reduction of reoffending action, a meeting took place in January, and Joe's volunteered to chair that particular strategic group. Be aware there's a statutory responsibility that sits with the probation service and the community safety partnership, providing oversight, and that's particularly around the aspect in relation to adults and children, because the children's reduction of reoffending piece of work is well overseen and governed within the youth justice arena. We receive regular reports. I've moved down to serious violence. There's an agenda item on serious violence and the work around the VRAP, which will take through. And in terms of events, the action in relation to permissive premises, that's been completed. As has the cuckooing work, that's all been completed. All the other actions have been completed, chairs.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions? Questions from anyone online? I have a question, Mark, about the board. I saw it was red. I couldn't really see the outcome of that as to what's happening for the progression.
So that's the dashboard. That's red because that hasn't been completed. That action, that was a request to have that delivered to this board. Seen some work that's been trialled.
Is there any work being done to ensure that in terms of, you know, getting out of the red into with?
So I think the issue is, it's just.
Yeah, I just want a bit of an explanation as to why there was an issue.
Yeah, I think there's maybe some capacity issues in the team, but we will be on that. It's also crystallising on what data is available, readily available. And sometimes there can be challenges getting data points still. Because they're not ready.
Just one again on the broad piece. Sorry, what the new services being in place from April 2026. Will we be able to see that? What that look like, so that we can look at some partnership working on how we can fit in?
Yeah, again, we can set an update on the.
So the broad piece is moving away from public protection and more into the neighbourhood world. So,
into policing.
Yeah, in our world.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to see how we could then fit into that.
Mark some bullet points come up within the presentation. So the next agenda item, if I may, chairs, is working towards a new community safety strategy 2027 onwards. You'll be aware that we have an existing strategy that's been subject to considerable discourse over the last 9 months and priorities being rationalised. Mindful of the need to refresh the strategy for a further 3 to 4 years, but a plan to share with you in terms of the programme of activity that's required. And so it's in loose a 7-month plan, allowing for drift. That'll take us to 9 months. By the time we get to December, we should have a new strategy. There's various elements, including the programme setup, governance and scoping, determining work streams, the data gathering, which include crime, context, broader intelligence. And when I talk about crime, we all rely on crime data, but there's broader contextual data that we need to take into account, such as incident deprivation, health data, and the like. And then we move through to the stage of analysis and problem solving. There's an ASARA type approach. That's an objective, scanning and analysing, and so forth. It's quite a discipline, but it's really important we consider volume, harm, vulnerability, location, and qualities and cross-cutting themes. and that'll become more and more apparent as we go through some of the which we are seeing. So there'll be a need for obviously engagement, consultation, and priority setting. That does include borough-wide consultation by a crime and disorder survey that will be designed and in the process of being designed at the moment. It will include focus groups in terms of women and girls, young people, faith groups, LGBT, and other communities across the borough of Cambridge. And it's really important in terms of forming a strategy that we have the lived experience of our communities that forms the next iteration of the strategy. And at that stage, we come to this decision and assessment of the strategy for drafting. Again, really important. That's based on not the science, but based on the data, the intelligence, and the views of our community. And I think probably a learning opportunity for the last iteration of the last community safety strategy. There wasn't a theory of change in terms of why we reached that, what we were trying to achieve. So one of the observations that I would make is that we can be better at setting out what we are trying to achieve, what the impact is, and then what are the activities that take us to that point where we've succeeded. And so when you get the strategy for the end of this year, 2027, you'll see an action and provide activity that begins drives the implement. And then there's obviously your final sign for publication and law, which will be for the next year. So that's the plan in terms of developing the new strategy. Got a second part I think is really important for us to consider our horizons going for now. I'm not going to go through the whole of this, but there's a number of key aspects to consider. The first of which is key national legislative and policy drivers that are confronting this this financial year: crime and policing bill, victim support, protection reforms, mandatory child sexual abuse reporting. And then as you go to cross-cutting implications to local community safety systems, there's governance and coordination, safeguarding and reporting, policing and crime powers, how the ASPA policing powers change and what we have available to us, housing and regulatory reforms, as we know, especially in relation to social behaviour. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, the local pressures that we're immediately confronted with. I say confronted with because we've got the local elections, and so we wait the results of those elections. We work with very tight financial constraints, and we're still mindful of that. And we'll just focus one moment on rising vulnerabilities and safeguarding. Again, through some of the slides, you'll see, I think, a rising tide in terms of some of the issues of vulnerability, mental health issues, how they cross-cut with the themes of crime and social behaviour and the like. But you'll see, I think, a common theme that arises. Violence and youth safety, clearly that's a piece of work that's going to be ongoing, in success. To know in terms of youth violence reduction. And then technology and AI integration, what does that actually mean for us? Folks who know me know I'm a Copilot fan, but there's great opportunity for us to make some better use. So there's a bit of a horizon for the next 12 months. Then in terms of what does that mean for us, I think strength and compliance preparedness, the adoption and planning for new laws and legislative regulations, hence bringing to this board here, so we're aware of them and we plan for them. Whole systems, public protection, shared risk management frameworks for vulnerable groups. And again, that links to the complexity and need and vulnerability for some of the cohorts of people that we are dealing with. I think we're the third or fourth most deprived borough in London. Certainly one of our wards is the most deprived in London. And that's as a nexus to some of the most vulnerable folks in UK. Harm reduction by prevention, again, touching on mental health support, tenancy sustainment work is really important. Local interventions for high-risk cases. And then in terms of how we operate, enhancing capacity of our workforce and their ability to form informed practice, safeguarding complex casework is that emergent area of business. And then in terms of preparing for funding changes, mainstreaming activities, you'll see a slide where we've lost funding this year already by, in effect, one post, and it's highly likely that that may happen again. And then leveraging technology. So that's a little section on in terms of the next 12 months, but building on the 2027 presentation for a new strategy.
Any question? Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. It was really good to see the community sort of public engagement aspects in and understand a survey will be done as part of that. Good to maybe see this something more detail. That would be a focus on digital inclusion as part of that. I know we use commonplace, but actually we give really good information about our social housing residents and the engagement views we've got through those that we might be able to use and have some targeted focus on as well. And you mentioned some of the groups. We also have the community network. I know you've mentioned the ethnic minority community, but it's good to see our community network networks reference a specific target group.
Certainly digital exclusion, there'll be a comprehensive plan that underpins this in terms of an engagement plan. On a board walk, was it Wednesday, I think, Helston Close and so forth. That was very apparent from the local residents, Turkish-speaking residents. I'm speaking on behalf of elderly residents who say they cannot access the systems, and it's a constant feature from the public in relation to finding it frustrating to report to the police because it's a very clunky method of reporting, finding it clunky to report to the council. So I'm really mindful of that. And the community networks at 100% because they've got a good breadth of networks.
Before I go to further questions, I just want to welcome the Borough Commander and McCartney.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I was late. I'm McCartney, so I oversee the policing both Harrogate
and I can see Councillor Brabazon, Cabinet Member for Children's Services, has also joined us. Do you want to introduce yourself, Zena? Councillor Brabazon, can you hear us?
Fine. Can you hear me? And
yes.
Now you can see me, maybe good or bad. Zena Brabazon, Cabinet Member, Children's Schools and Families. Apologies for being late. I did log in and then my computer went funny, but it's come back again. So I hope I haven't missed too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item?
In which case, if I can move on, I'm going to ask Sandy to talk to the next set of slides, which start with a mini strategic slides.
Thank you. Yes, so Sandra, going to just take us through the strategic assessment for Harrogate, which was the latest document which was produced just over the past few months in terms of using all the data that we have across the partnership to hopefully inform us around where we're sitting in terms of our direction of travel, but also some of the gaps or strengths or weaknesses that we might want to consider as a community partnership. So in terms of the assessment, for those who are not familiar with what that really is, the purpose really is to help us to make decisions around strategic priorities for what we as a partnership are looking to do to make the borough as safe as possible. But it's more than just a statutory requirement. I think it really is a shared roadmap, hopefully, for action, and it shows hopefully where we're making progress, but also where there might be some risks. So my aim over the next few minutes really is just highlight some things which I think maybe matter the most, and maybe where we as a joint partnership might want to just focus our attention over the coming year or so. So in terms of some of the executive summary, which is just on screen there, you'll see there are areas where we are improving. We're seeing some reductions in some particular crime types, for example. So things like youth violence, we're seeing a reduction in that in and around 24% in the past year or so, which is quite a significant success, I think. I think it does highlight some of the value of the multi-agency approach and safeguarding contextual approaches that we've taken. We've also seen things like a reduction in knife crime across a number of different wards. Around more than half the wards in Harrogate have seen reductions within knife crime. We've also seen reductions in non-domestic violence with injury and a number of other things you'll see on your screen there. However, there are still risk and harm areas that we do need to consider, some of which you can see, again, this is on your screen there. Sexual offences, for example, seeing an increase, although we do want to encourage reporting as well. So there's a real balance in terms of things like domestic abuse, sexual offences, and making sure that victims feel supported to report those things. But you can see on screen there some of those potential risks, but also acquisitive crime, we've seen some reductions, but a very fed person, for example, seeing some improvements. Of course, there are some key drivers around the borough which make Harrogate unique, but also that do act as a contributing factor to some of the crime and ASB pictures that we do see. For example, as Mark has already mentioned, we do have high levels of deprivation within the borough, some of the highest in London. Some of those are really concentrated, particularly towards the east of the borough. Also, based on the information we have from public health colleagues, from the wider network, things like rising mental health needs, high levels of drug dependency, alcohol-related challenges as well, all of which we know are criminogenic needs potentially and can lead to increased risk and harm. There's also, of course, the disproportionality aspects to consider. We know that whilst not necessarily too different to the London picture, close to 80% of suspects for where known in Harrogate are male, and also there is no representation of individuals with an ethnicity shown as black, the both victims and also perpetrators of crime within the borough. And finally, geographically, there is obviously also some disproportionality. We know there are a number of hotspot wards, wards such as Knoll Park and Thomland Park, Seven Sisters, for example, being the top three generally for crime levels. Those are, again, just some areas we want to consider. Although there's lots of work already going on those, just assessing perhaps what is successful, perhaps what work needs to do differently, to ensure we continue in a positive pathway. So there's a number of recommendations listed on your screen there, which I think are a continuation of what we've been doing for a number of years, and do build upon some of the good work that's already been in place, which has shown some success, but also maybe just a reflection on how we can perhaps do some of these things better or integrate those in different ways, and also ensure we have the best bang for buck. So just a few recommendations, for example, showing on incentivizing the focus on the high harm crimes. So trying to, I suppose, use our limited resources in the most effective way, rather than necessarily trying to solve all crimes, which may be more of a stretch. And some consolidating the progress in serious violence. We know, as we already said, youth violence in particular has seen reduction over the last few years. Robbery, for example, for those who have been around for maybe 5 or so years, you'll note that we were seeing around about 3,000 robberies a year just before the pandemic. We're now seeing closer to about 1,100 robberies a year. So really good to see that direction of travel, but how do we consolidate that progress? Also, just seeing how we're fully integrating all of our responses to some of the structural drivers, as I mentioned, mental health, deprivation, substance abuse, make sure that those are, again, fully embedded in all the work that we are doing, as well as some of the other things such as high and low place-based action, continuing on the work we're doing around disproportionality. I know there's the really good work around stop search that we're doing, as well as, from my perspective, particularly improving our data accuracy and insight, making sure we understand what we're doing, if it's contributing, and how can we link the work we're doing to outcomes and outputs. It is really key. If we just flick on just a couple of slides, just to the cost of crime slide, just really highlight what it's across the platform. This slide here just shows a summary of what we can call the cost of crime. So the way in which this is contextualized is essentially the Home Office attributes what they call the socioeconomic cost of crime to any specific individual crime that takes place. And that essentially is the cost to society of that crime occurring. So crime outside would be the most expensive by that measure, and lower level crimes might be less expensive. This is a fairly well-known metric that Home Office also utilise. So based on that, for 2025, the estimated, because of course these things are estimates, cost of crime for Harrogate was around £178 million. For London overall, it's about 5.2 billion, and Harrogate sits around about 13th, so around about just about mid-table in terms of the total cost of crime for Harrogate. So I think that really demonstrates that if we do have a positive impact upon reducing, any amount of crime, that the socioeconomic benefit of that, when we consider it, for example, in this way, of course, there's lots of ways to consider it. There is a tangible benefit that we could see to that. If we flick over just to the next slide, please. And this really just breaks down what that looks like. So of our £178 million or so of total cost, you can see how that's distributed across the various different crime types. And again, these are estimates, but nonetheless, violence with injury, as you might expect, is the largest category of that, followed by violence without injury. And the third highest would be rape offences, and fourthly, homicide. So you can see how each of the different crime types contributes to that. So this I think balances risk versus volume, and it's just, again, another way to look at some of the crimes we might want to think about prioritising going forward. In terms of our priorities and what this means for our priorities, I think really this validates a lot of the work we've already been doing in terms of understanding the priorities that we already have in place that we might want to consider continuing. And so just, again, considering what that might look like in terms of a draft of priorities, and again, this is here for, I suppose, consideration of the group to understand if these are the direction travels that we want to focus on. Picking out the key aspects potentially, and again, some of these are similar to things we've been doing over the last year or so, focusing on particular areas such as serious violence, youth exploitation, non-domestic violence of injury, as well as violence against women and girls, and domestic abuse. Focus on ASB, as we know from the community, that antisocial behaviour in particular can be a significant blight on daily life, as well as things like neighbourhood offending, hate crime, and also robbery, which we know, again, Harrogate, whilst we've seen some really good progress, Harrogate is still a large contributor to robbery. So perhaps just bring together all that information, and this is followed by around about 70 further data slides. in today's meeting, but they will follow for the consideration of the group. But overall, you can see we've seen that it's really good progress over the last few years. There's still a long way to go. We know that the risk levels in Harrogate have reduced over the years, but they are still higher and elevated than maybe some of our other neighbouring boroughs. So this hopefully will help us continue in that direction of travel as a partnership to really focus on what we can do in this space. Questions?
Has anyone got any questions for Sandy at all?
Hi, Bill. Could you go back, Sandy, just to the slide on the summary slide, the first summary slide, around the high harm crimes? Do we think around? Do we think that is a reflection of better detection? Is it that we're getting more offences in the borough? So just get a perspective on that.
Which bit are you looking at, Will?
So the drug
high harm crime, sexual offences.
So I think we've done a lot of work to encourage in the forward work, encouraging for example, and the drugs and alcohol. There's been clear whole bill for that. Yeah.
Sexual, I mean, it would be interesting to get a breakdown of the sexual offences to understand which ones are through street working, sexual offences in street work, which ones are within the home and domestic setting, to really understand those sort of numbers. And you and I, both know that actually an increase in numbers of reporting is often seen as a deaf people to come forward and report it. So it's one of those crimes that doesn't go away. It's quite in the shadows alongside sort of drug use and knife crime as well. Sometimes an increase in those numbers actually mean a better detection of those offences as opposed to there being actual rise in crime. For that one, I would probably say that we have got better processes, both within the local authority and within policing at this moment in time to detect and to link in with the victims, as well as to deal with the offenders more appropriately on a sort of a long term, in a long term manner. So yes.
So I guess just it's important that so North Erins is reflected across all of London for public protection related offences, everything from slavery, stalking, child sexual exploitation. We have seen an increase in reporting. To your point, being able to break that down into is there more of it or are people just more confident to report it to us? I don't think any of us have the full picture, and I just wonder whether LOPAC actually are doing any work.
No, I mean they were previously, weren't they? But I haven't heard of any movement about doing that again.
And I think this goes to the question, especially 2027 onwards, is what we are trying to achieve in terms of impact. Because these are stats about reported crime. If we see it go down, sometimes we celebrate that, don't we? Especially things like burglary. But actually, it's how community feels. Because we may see crime levels collapsing, falling in certain areas, and I've seen that. But if I go and speak to residents, there's a real fear factor, and actually they're feeling worse off than they did before. And I'm thinking for the future, our measures should be far more subtle and looking for a longer 4 or 5 year plan where we're looking at the impact of year on year perception of communities by our engagement through the community groups, etc., etc.
And potentially look at the stats alongside positive outcome rates as well, so we understand when they are being reported, how are we actually dealing and managing with them effectively.
Just to come back, so you mentioned the org dashboard. So one of the things that we have got is the when coming back to the MARAC, the repeat MARAC, it has come down, which shows that maybe some evidence that our partnership response is getting better in response to the cases. So I think it's thinking we would probably want to see these things really well. It's how we measure. Just again, something that we can do with the drugs offences. Work around public health, partnership around that. There's a big focus on getting people into treatment from the justice system, and there are a few things that we probably work on in those pathways, judges that we're working through. We like to get all of those people into treatment. We've got a really good, good offer in terms of
and actually, the plus 43% in drug offences, I, from a policing perspective, and we will always look at those stats. Probably, in neighbourhood work, I look at them. I become I feel quite positive about those increases because it means that our officers are out there locating the drugs, prosecuting the drugs. Again, when we're looking at that, it would be interesting to see what avenues we're then taking with those offenders to make sure that we are providing them with the support to come out of how we're prosecuting them. But so I think if you presented that to the public to say, it's an increase of 43% in drugs, there may be a concern that actually drug use supply is increasing, whereas actually we know it's probably not. Just that there has been better action, better reporting and better recording. I don't know what our reporting standards are like, but we can overlay information. So, of the people that have been arrested, how many are then placed into programs, again, repeat offenders.
We have got some of that information, but I think that across London, there's some challenges. There's some challenges with probation, like, kind of the links with people on probation to the drug service, testing and custody suites, all of these things. So there's lots of areas we can work to.
Which, in actual fact, as we increase those provisions, it actually makes it more difficult for us to deal with them because the volume gets higher, but our ability to cope and deal with them doesn't increase. We still have the same resources to.
Sorry, I just think with these issues, unless we're kind of looking at the road with drugs now, we've got to get people into treatment to understand the harm and supply. Otherwise, the problems kind of move around to different parts of London potentially, or different. But BCU, we do see that as well. Again,
I was going to ask a question about because whilst I know robbery has gone down and theft person has gone down, real disproportionate impacts in areas. So more looking at the breakdown of data. We were going to that slide. No. Yeah, so all the trend is down, but some really, really significant increases. Whilst obviously theft person is slightly different in nature from robbery, I just wondered actually that looks like it's moving to different locations and areas across the borough that we might not have seen previously.
Yeah, so these changed over a 4-year period as well. Yeah. So over those 4 years as well, the way that we record robbery and theft person has changed over those years as well. So previously in 2022, what we might have recorded as a robbery, we now record as a theft person. So that can cause some
ups and
downs. Yeah.
Piece here, 24 versus 25. It's just interesting. So, like, around it's areas that aren't constant. We really might see. So, Ali Pally around Spurs, for example. I think that's events and activities that take place, and we've had more events, therefore you might expect more theft person. But actually, when you look at the profile, it's not in those areas. It is in some of our residential or high street areas. And just wondered if that was being picked up through the relevant subgroups for focus.
Yeah, and we look at MO as well. So the theft person will increase as well, depending on what kind of modus operandi. So with the introduction of e-scooters and e-bikes, we saw an increase in theft person because it made it that much easier. And that will, of course, as well, as we do operations and we look to target areas that must also cause those offences. So we do look at that. I do think it's worth noting, though, if we mentioned a reduction in robbery, and I was looking at these statistics, it's more like inspectors as well, because we were looking. And I've been here off and on, so as an inspector, and then came back long enough that I can recognise. So, for example, today we saw a spike in robbery in one area, and that spike actually accounted for 5 robberies in a month, which is, 5 years ago, I remember coming in on an early turn and I was looking at 16 robberies in one morning, on one school route. So there's been dramatic decreases in our robbery rates. But yes, it is all looked at. So the displacement's looked at, the trends, the locations, the ages. But what we find
Enfield, I know, just by way of
very different. Well, and actually, I think Enfield's having a bit of a spike at the moment. But you also find spikes in robbery. So when when Apple release a new iPhone, you have spikes. So it's even events like that. When iPods were introduced, there was a spike. So, you know, across London, you'll see different patterns based on certain instances that are completely out of, you know, anyone's control, and you know, outside of London's control as well. It just, but yeah, we are aware of those things. We do track them. And make sure that we have to comment.
Good question, Sandeep, or to partners. In terms of the mental health needs, I just want to know, like, how effective as a partnership you think we are in terms of a joined up approach in dealing with mental health needs. Where do you think the shortfalls are? How do you think we can improve as a partnership? Because that is quite an issue we see in our housing stock. You know, I think it's, yeah, because especially if we're going to develop, no, because especially as we're going to start developing the community safety partnership strategy, I think it's important for us to kind of gather that feedback.
We've seen a significant uptick, I'll describe it as, in terms of matters associated with mental health. Being that people who are placed into Harringay, people who are resident in Harringay, who are in care and support needs, in terms of causing antisocial behaviour and committing crimes. We've had some discussions around responsiveness of the police that have been addressed on an individual basis. But that said, within the body of this pack is a proposal for a 5-week, 6-week project to look at repeat victim incidences for antisocial behaviour, but possibly other crime types, and then use that data to wash it against social care data, to wash it against health data, to see if there are trends that enable us to better focus our activities. A short-term response has been proliferation of professional meetings taking place. Certainly, I've chaired one particular case, or 2 cases, 3 meetings on one particular case. One example involved within a family arrangement, one person living with a certain disability, loads and loads of calls to the police, 9-10 calls about domestic issues and antisocial behaviour requiring intervention as a partnership, and that's being done. Another case where someone's been parachuted in from a neighbouring borough to support accommodation is causing a little bit of mayhem in the local community. That's required management across the partnership in terms of social care professionals from 2 different boroughs, from across the police being involved in terms of enforcement action, and subsequently from the care provider taking enforcement action in relation to the accommodation. It's immensely complex. So we may have to design a process that's far more robust and able to actually deal with that demand, as opposed to having ad hoc professional meetings.
Yeah, and if I may come in as well. So there's lots of work through public health around the prevention agenda here. Just down the road, the Roger Sylvester Centre, which will act as a crisis prevention house, will be increasing the number of crisis prevention beds. So I think there are some really welcome set pieces that are coming in, but actually it's the coordination, and it's also the links to adult safeguarding. And in some cases, we're seeing that come through in multi-agency support, and in others we haven't really got the kind of consistent approach that I'd like to see all partner agencies working together. I think from an adult social care perspective and a community support perspective, there are and you know, there are things that have had impact. Right care, right person works really well in terms of releasing that policing resources, but we are seeing cases where ASB or people becoming really unwell in the community are then really managed through that earlier intervention approach, and it gets to the point where it escalates to crisis. So the North London Foundation Trust are about to implement a community assertive outreach team, which will focus where that is actually impacted by medication non-compliance, which is quite a big issue actually, and presents as behavioural issues in the community quite often. So we're really focused on how we build our neighbourhood health agenda around having a core pillar of that, around that community. There have been some instances where that, you know, it's clearly moved from antisocial behaviour to violence or criminality. And we need to make sure we're using all of our right channels of escalation to really grip issues. And some of those examples Mark has spoken about. And, you know, from my perspective, I see triple impact of that, right? Because I'm seeing it from an adult's perspective, housing perspective, and the impact on neighbours in the community. And I'm then also seeing that what's then happening is that demand and crisis point needs an inpatient stay. And then when residents are ready to come back into the community, sometimes they need a really high cost package of so. So I really, really welcome the partnership work we do in this space, and it really is taking that preventative approach all the way through to then how we manage residents escalate to crisis and then coming back into the community. There is a bit of a gap, to be honest, in provision, not just in Haringey, across London, or where mental health and also issues around neurodivergence mean that there is a difference between health and social care and behavioural. You know, we really welcome and support the shift for neurodivergence not being managed in, you know, a health facility, let's say. But I think our commissioning approach needs to change. And we've been having just on Friday, I was with North London councils and our partnership deal with complex behavioural issues through the lens of health and social. So we're looking to do some collaborative work of what is the North Central London region as is now, the ICB, that will morph into a bigger ICB, but just some examples of some of the things that are going on and how we need to work in a multi-agency partnership really to try to respond to that ever increasing risk and demand.
Any further questions on this item?
In that case, Mark, we'll come to yourself again for Clear Hold Build.
Clear Hold Build, and I have my time, so I'm going to a quick counter through. And this will be very much focused on Northumberland Park as opposed to Finsbury. A bit of an overview about structure, delivery, partnership, strategic delivery, Silver in terms of view, but there are 3 operational delivery areas: crime and community safety, homes and housing, and communities. So in terms of crime and community safety and homes and housing, there's a view now to combine those 2 groups to streamline activity because we're touching on the same business, so it doesn't make much sense to have 2 separate groups. Underneath those 2 groups is a new weekly operational meeting. When I say new, it's about 10 weeks now. It's a weekly coordination meeting across the police and other partners, housing, social care, voluntary sector and the like, which is showing good progress. And in terms of communities, the group that Will's leading on, there's excellent work taking place in relation to sex work. That's gone quite a way, actually. It's really developing very, very quickly. Starting point for a low basis point, I think, in terms of that particular activity. In terms of the 3 groups, really, in terms of I'm not going to go into the small slide detail because I can't read it because my eyes are so poor. People, premises in place. It was felt really important to make this relatively simple. So in terms of people, we look at what are the challenges that we're confronted with. So the individual cohorts, such as those involved in sex work, the rough sleepers, the drug takers and so forth, the premises, what are the drivers, be that businesses, be that individual housing that are being cocooned, places in terms of localities of concern where environmental changes could support and reduce and suppress criminality. And there's a number of interventions that are listed in terms of individuals. So President in particular, so of course the police are very active and proactive in terms of arrests, warrants and so forth. Again, a lot of that's driven from community intelligence in terms of housing stock, notice seeking possession, evictions and the like that are taking place, as well as CPN, CPWs, injunctions as a partnership. There's a whole raft of processes that have been implemented, and you'll see that in terms of the antisocial behaviour presentation that follows. I think we could be better, an area of development in terms of how we work as a partnership across the system in terms of the voluntary sector. We've got wonderful voluntary groups. Sometimes it's a bit disparate in provision in terms of it's a Thursday night, Tuesday night and so forth. We're better about utilising their resource, but also the wider communities such as faith groups, such as schools and the like. So as an example, I'm starting a piece of work with Duke's Aldrich Academy and the head teacher there, the executive principal, and more in terms of using that as a hub in relation to the feeder schools, the primary schools that go into that area, because we recognise in terms of crime prevention and the like, it's really important to address the transition from primary to secondary school in that particular locality. And I'm going to give myself a big brouhaha here because we just got an award for our left and former borough making Hayes safe. It's got a national award for that particular approach that's been adopted. It's an approach I'd like to actually try and utilise in this local area. Just moving on quickly to some presentation about some of the data, and it just highlights, and again, this is mindful, we've seen some really good reductions, the overlay of different crime data over the year in terms of reported crime, and the areas with the green arrows I've just inserted there that talk to the reductions compared to previous years. So I think we can celebrate that to a degree, but I'm mindful, as I said at the start, is that sometimes communities are not confident reporting crime and such behaviour. So there's a bit of a health warning around that. And then again, you can see if you look at that, so since the start of Clear Whole Build, there is a gentle downward trend there, and I think we can accept that looking at that. And the arrows are, I think, are against February, so you can see the general drift down. I'm not going to talk to my next slide because I'm mindful of time, but it's basically the SWOT analysis of what's working well, what could be improved. And I think what I would celebrate is actually the partnership working. So honesty between agencies. We recognise our own frailties, we recognise the opportunities to improve. I think we can be better in terms of deciding about our long-term impact and actually how Clear Whole Build actually integrates into 2027 to 2031 community safety strategy as a discussion point, if you will. And I'll stop there at that point.
Any questions from on Clear Whole Build site? I do have one. So very quickly, and it's more of an opinion I'm seeking. So obviously, Northumberland, obviously Haringey, we've both spoken about this, is the only borough within London that has two Clear Whole Build sites. And we do tend to focus on Northumberland Park because that's where our residents are. We go on Finsbury Park, other partners. We have residents there. We have very few business partners there. Actually, we don't have people that we have to account to apart from the footfall through that area. Moving forward with the Finsbury Park site as well, because I noticed that we haven't mentioned it at all. Do you think there is going to be some problems and issues there that do need to be addressed?
We are stretched in the police and the council, to my honest answer, in terms of resourcing to their sites, because they each come with their own set of governance, their own set of expectations, own set of command structures, and we are the only borough in London, possibly the only authority in the country that's got two Clear Whole Build sites. And so that does cause logistical issues. That being said, the coordination across the three boroughs, particularly between Hackney and Islington, is good. We do contribute, and as the owner of the park, there's a great deal of work that's undertaken by let's say Parks colleagues.
Parks team.
Parks team, sorry, Parks team, borough team. Roughly, we've seen significant achievements in that regard. In actual fact, just hot off the press, literally in the last 24 hours, I know a bit's gone into the Home Office for a park art patrol, Finsbury Park. That has been successful. That's for one night a week. The night to be selected, and that's to combat violence against girls. And that's to be celebrated because
that is hot for the press.
It's literally off the press, literally off the press. And so the lady who put the bid in, Rose, forgive me, I've not her so much. I met with her 8 weeks ago. She's working with Islington at Hackney, worked with me, I went through the bid. Various options are put forward, and that's been agreed. I see that's been really exciting in terms of the potential, in the same way that Parkard has had an impact in terms of antisocial behaviour and so forth, and feelings of safety in Northumberland Park. I actually see this potential there in that other area as well. We can be better coordinated, I think, in terms of Finsbury Park. That requires resource, time, effort, and application. struggling with the number of hours as it is. I think we all are. And just that's being really honest as opposed to dressing up.
Question about, I mean, coming from the perspective of a ward councillor from Northumberland Park as well, I keep on hearing from residents, especially from the South Residents Association, that there is still issues with police visibility. And I just want to know, how is the coordination, how effective is the coordination between Park Guard, which is now looking over the estates, and the local police, because we are still seeing issues around Roebuck Close, and I just feel like even though we've got closure orders, dispersal orders, we're still not being able to effectively manage those issues there. So I just, how effective is that coordination piece between?
It is. I can only,
teams?
yeah, I can only speak towards the coordination between Mark's team and my team. That's obviously led by Tom. The specific issue that I think you sort of alluded to, I'm aware of, and it's not something that we can. But simply to say, it's very difficult when you're addressing a problem that might take longer than go in, arrest, come away again. Very difficult to provide that reassurance to the local residents that something is happening up until you get to the conclusion of it. So that's always one of those tricky things that you have to try and balance. At the moment, do we have some resourcing issues and concerns in there? Yes, we do. Northumberland Park seems to be taking on the majority of the hit in there. Although we are moving our town centre team more into that, we're making some changes to make sure we can free them up a little bit more to assist as well. But they are a team of 4 or 5 officers who are essentially taking on this, crime problem. We're trying to link in where we are. To make sure that they're more visible on the night duty, because we don't particularly most of. And I think one of the problems around the work that Tom has been doing alongside Mark is that it has been alluded to before, caused a little bit of displacement, which has meant the crime within the hours of about 2 o'clock at night onwards, I think we're seeing, has increased over the past 2 months. And of course, neighbourhoods, so they have been changing their hours, but of course, when they change their hours, what we then see is an impact the next couple of days as well, when you won't then have their presence. So it is a constant sort of balancing act. I do think that when you see the fact that there are improvements going on there, crime is coming down, so the figures and statistics is coming down. The areas that we're seeing rises in crimes are where I would want to see rises in crime. So if you look at drug supply, drug use, stats within the South have gone up considerably, and that is due to arrests, prosecutions, such as the same with knife crime. The knife crime in that area, possession of weapons has gone up, and that is again due to police action. But of course, we also know that when you have police action, it can also cause the belief there is more crime. So if people haven't noticed those hidden offences that go on behind the dark corners, when you have arrests, actually that visibility of that crime increases. So for reassurance, yes, there is. I'm happy at the moment. There is joint. Can it be better? We rely on resources and money, which is always going to be a tricky subject at the moment. But I think there have been improvements there.
If it's reassurance, the weekly meeting is a half-hour punchy meeting. There are minutes that are recorded. Information is translated into action. Sometimes it can't translate into action because you don't have the resource to commit. So utopia would be setting a 7-day week planner that says we've got a presence of some description in that particular area. One could make the case to have that. If you look at Northumberland Park, its indices of deprivation, the most deprived rural in London, then you look at the crime levels. And then if it were an academic exercise comparing the resourcing levels within that particular area from a policing perspective to the 32 other boroughs in London and all the individual wards, I wonder what it looks like. Is it different? So that's the question to be looked at, which is big. Just reflecting.
Talking. Why we had 2 areas that was chosen in Harringay when
I can answer that, but I might come across as being a little bit narky. So the Northumberland Park, obviously Northumberland Park and everything, it's a massive clearhold bill. If you look at the reasons, if you look at what clearhold bill should be, it specifically states it should be a geographical location that is easy to manage and is an appropriate size for the resourcing. Because it was one of the first clearhold bill sites, I think that the excitement went to some heads. And I know that it was so it was meant to just be, I think at one point when it was proposed, it was just meant to be the South site, wasn't it? Originally, it was just meant to be Northumberland Park, that estate there, which would have been tricky on its own anyway, but it would have been manageable. There was some, I think what the right word is, there was some encouragement for it to be extended, because I think there was a belief that there would be constant increases of money and resources that would be able to come in, which probably for some period of time is the truth. You know, we do get injections of more resources and money, but it's not a sustainable injection. You know, you then have your lulls and business as usual. But because of that, people, you know, were excited to try and get it on board and have it expanded. And I think the excitement at the time, they decided that, yes, of course, let's do whatever we can. And I think there was a certain amount of appeasement as well for people who went, why shouldn't we benefit from this? So it was not just expanded north, it was also expanded west, sorry, geographical, never reached anybody. It was expanded west as well, which was never meant to be like that. So this is where we are, three and a half years later.
To go until.
There is no end date. So, I mean, and this is the issue. So you have your clear phase, which is, you know, sort of the police-led action where we go in and essentially clear the area to try and get it to a level and a state where we want it to be. And then you have the hold phase where we put in, you know, partnership approaches to make sure that we can sustain it, and really clear and hold is done at the same time. And then you have the build phase, which is, you know, having made these improvements, let's design our crime. Let's put in these big sustainable, you know, if you look at Enfield, they have a £12 million budget to do improvements on the north side of our clearhold build side, you know, that they're moving towards. That's not necessarily replicated across all, unless you have £12 million. Grab cash. So that's unfortunately the situation that we are in. Which was, yeah, it was a new project, excitement, you know, let's go for broke, let's go big. And I think in that period, they actually lost sight of what it was meant to do and how it could have been sustained. And they also forgot that it's not a short, sharp operation that you quite often have. This is a long term, you know, years. You're talking three to 5 years was their belief, but we all know that actually we're going to be looking probably at 5 to 10, if not more, if you're properly embracing it into the build phase.
Got Councillor Bravis on and yeah.
I think thank you very much. It's really interesting discussion. I have a long history of knowledge about Northumberland Park, and I ran neighbourhood management there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do know the ward really well, and I think this SWOT analysis gives us a good starting point. So I've got a few points I want to make. The first one is Mark and I know about joint working with Enfield. One of the things being adjacent to Edmonton, or what you might call Greater Tottenham, brings some problems, I think, issues. It's about boroughs do export people who are have serious problems to their neighbours rather than do it themselves. And I think we have to be mindful if that is going on in Northumberland Park, which already is an area full of people who have quite serious problems. So I think working with Enfield is really important, both on the people, social care and physical front, you know, like buildings and stuff like that. That's one point. I think it's critical working with housing because there's been a long history, and I don't know if it's still going on, Ashta, of antisocial behaviour in the blocks. So that is something having that strong relationship with housing has to be in place so that residents living in their homes feel safe. I think that's hugely important. I think we need to have something there about talking to planning so that we're not seeing more HMOs or houses converted to HMOs, because I think that's an issue. In this borough, we're full of HMOs, and that can also increase problems. So I think having good relationship with planning, keeping an eye on planning of what's going through the planning system would be worth doing in building the framework. And on my end, I've been a bit out of touch with that for a while, but I was very concerned that that funding was not being used very effectively. I think things might have improved. So I'm just want to put a marker down that I hope that's the case. And finally, I think telling a story is really important. If good things have happened, we need to tell people, and it's not enough to do it on a website or, you know, Facebook somewhere. In that community, we have to tell people in a different way because they don't always communicate digital, if they do, but we just need to tell our story. And we have enormously strong organisations there, like the Play Association, which I think is a huge anchor, and we should use very effectively to communicate with families. It's always full, and I'm not sure it's always at the table. I'd like to see the NRC doing adult ed there. We used to do that, and that was really, really effective. And job search using the Neighbourhood Resource Centre and so on. So, you know, I think there are things we can do, and Clearhold Build gives us a framework to do that. I don't know if that's helpful, but those are things which seem to me to be absolutely, you know, obvious, early, you know, obvious really. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. I think that was quite. We'll go to Anna and then we'll go to responses to.
Nina, I don't know if you can see me or not. So, Anne McCartney, Chief Superintendent of North Area speaking. Some of the things you've just described there, so I started in role in December, and I chaired a Clearhold Build exec board, which sees Haringey and Enfield sitting on from a local authority perspective, with an mission of health at that meeting, which we recognised. The next meeting is April, and there are 2 key actions which have been set for that. Well, actually 3. One is representation at the meeting. We just need to make sure we've got everybody there who needs to be. Our definitions of success, so looking at Mark's SWOT analysis here, actually what defines our success from each of the partnership areas, and actually then us communicating that, and that will help us really clearly establish when we've moved from the clear into the build, into the hold phase. Actually, the lead agency for this work will change throughout the course of the programme. And I think having those definitions will stop this just becoming business as usual, because I think we are at the risk of, we've been pumping resource and activity into this one particular area for so long, it's just become something that we do without any end dates, potentially. And when we move out of this phase, that I think once we define what our success looks like, it makes our communication a lot easier. The other action, the third action, is for us to take back and socialise a comms and engagement strategy that supports this operation. So not just selling our successes, but actually sharing with the community how we access new services, different services that have been brought into the area as a result. So they're all really valid points, and the exec board will pull all of those together. So I think by the time we come around in 3 months of this meeting, we should have a really good update for Clearhold Build.
Right, so we're going to the priority reports now. So lead officers for.
So there's a series of reports that, generally speaking, there are 2 slides for each. I suggest a matter of time, which is to the first slide, is an assessment, a red and green assessment. There'll be lead officers, I think, for most of them. At all. So the first one in relation to antisocial behaviour, and I don't know, Adam, if you're there, I can't see you, but if you could possibly run through the assessment in terms of antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, no problem at all. Afternoon, everybody. Adam Brown, ASB, CCTV and Enforcement Manager. We've come so far in the last 12 months, I think, the reality. We've set a lot of framework, a lot of governance, lots of quality assurance exercises. And I think it kind of demonstrates here that, you know, we're not perfect and it's an evolving process, but we've demonstrated that we can get a balance right of kind of quick wins and tackling some of the more ingrained and long-standing problems. Obviously, we are limited to the powers that we are afforded. And, you know, at the moment, there are significant national blockers, like the amount of court time, for example, it takes to get injunctions and such things into play. But for the most part, okay, from a local level, getting our own ducks in a row, so to speak, I don't think we could have done any more. You know, we've got an ASB strategic group now, which dovetails in nicely with the arrival of the new ASB policy. Cuckooing and High Harm panel now kind of picks up where we left CMARAC. CMARAC was a kind of community safety based multi-agency forum that unfortunately due to police resources had to be abandoned in early 2025. I've now established and set up the Cuckooing and High Harm panel, which not only means we can pick up the majority of those high risk cases we spoke about earlier, particularly the ASB cases that feature mental health and vulnerability, where they wouldn't necessarily fit anywhere else. But also now that we are, you know, the pilot borough for the UK essentially is the one London borough that's received MOPAC funding for a dedicated cuckooing team, which I'm fortunate enough to manage. It's meant that we've got, you know, resources and processes in play to deal with that very nuanced piece of work, and we're making good headway. You know, neighbourhood patrol is a really interesting piece of work, and that's a huge asset. Mark and I are very fortunate to be working with housing colleagues to coordinate that and kind of share the operational intelligence. I think now also, more importantly, we've got a raft of performance indicators that allow us to benchmark where we're at, and I think that's probably a first for Haringey on the ASB side of things. And I think certainly working with Nahara and Co in housing, we've had to, and it's still an evolving process, but you know, it's very hard to compare apples and onions. And actually, everything from being able to do freedom of information requests and stuff is really difficult when you don't have a case management system. We're making progress with that, but actually, more importantly, we can start to quantify what we're doing, and not only what we're doing, the kind of outcome it's starting to have. You know, certainly around closure orders, we've got a much more quality assured process I oversee now, where we really seriously consider the impact of denying somebody, you know, access to their own property versus the balance that has against, you know, the greater good, and particularly when there's a significant or disproportionate amount of impact caused by one address, particularly on our housing estates, where the rest of the residents then have to deal on a daily basis with those kind of disproportionate issues. So we really have come quite far. I think there are some issues, and you know, they are enabled in some ways by, you know, some of the issues the police are facing, same as us, you know, limited resources. I think if I had an antisocial behaviour team twice the size of the one I do, I could probably still just do work in Northumberland Park and still have work to do. That's without the rest of the borough. And, you know, there's the kind of cyclical pain that we all feel, and I know colleagues in housing feel the same. You know, it's a bit chicken and egg. We repair some of our areas to try and get rid of some of the ASB in our communal areas. The ASB itself leads to criminality and criminal damage, and we kind of find ourselves down a rabbit hole where ASB is perpetuated by a kind of inability for all of us to secure some of our properties in a really ideal way that someone won't find a way around. And then that in turn means that we spend an awful lot of time and resource dealing with the same issues. But, you know, in the absence of a better way of doing it, we're really good now at taking a step back, looking at it holistically at a problem, going back at the grassroots, maybe not always chasing what we think the right thing to do is, and actually looking about, you know, what we can chip away at and where we can take an Achilles heel style approach. And I think now we're also much better about dealing with those residents who come to us who are not happy or don't feel that we have solved their problem. Something that used to be called community trigger, we now call it ASB case reviews. And I've brought in a much more robust system whereby anyone quite rightly who feels that we haven't met, or the housing association hasn't met, or whichever service hasn't met what they believe would have been the most appropriate way of remedying their problem, we now look at that through an objective lens and come up, if need be, with a toolkit of proposals and recommendations that could be in place. And, you know, where we're doing it on a case, for example, that belongs to a housing association or social landlord, we now hold them to account and tell them, you know, the standard that we would expect them to do for our residents. And we offer to help them and support them almost in a mentoring fashion to effectively manage antisocial behaviour. I think probably that's, in a nutshell, that's ASB for me. Unless, Chair, you think there's a... Sorry, Mark, unless you think there's something missing.
I think the ASB case reviews are quite revealing in terms of the trends that are arising. It's a really good vehicle for general public to have a conversation, be taken seriously. there's lots of learning that comes out. And I'd probably invite some feedback from CSB, what I think, because that's one thing information. Just in the top right hand corner, to endorse a piece of work, and that relates to mental health. There are some slides that follow talking about that mental health piece of work that I described earlier on. I don't think it's necessary to go through that, but I just asked the consent party endorsing that piece of work and asking for it to come back to this forum. Hannah and I have had long discussions about that, about the data, then take that across with social care colleagues and alike. But putting it through here, it puts the onus on us if we get a really good product that tells the scale and scope of that problem and the opportunities as well to manage that.
Agreement on the enforcement. Yeah.
So, KPIs there. Overview. We can circulate this. That's the project overview in relation to the mental health piece of work. And then I'm going to go very specifically, if that's okay, to just something in relation to hate crime. To give us 5 minutes.
Hello everyone, Elvan, from home. I think before anything, it's useful for me to give a very short update on what we've seen with international conflicts, national conflicts over the last few months, because a lot of work that we do is really steered by what happens internationally as well as nationally. I'm going to talk from December onwards. So we had Bondi Beach attack, which had a massive impact on Jewish communities globally, and the engagement continuing with our Jewish communities through the Multi-Faith Forum and Haringey. Of course, we've got really strong established networks across Haringey's Jewish communities. And over the past year, we've been working really closely with our connections in the Stamford area. What is happening in Haringey as well, and working with the Haringey Orthodox Jewish community as well, thanks to Councillor Master as well. And so we're really engaged with the community and we continue to do that. At the end of December, we saw Iran-related tensions as well, what was happening with the regime. And of course, what happens abroad in people's homes has an effect on our communities. In Haringey as well, because of the diverse communities that Haringey. And we did touch base with our Iranian communities to make sure that they were okay. And because of the internet blackouts that were happening back home, it caused a lot of anxieties within communities that had families and loved ones at home. Moving on, we saw a huge conflict with the Syrian regional government and the effects that it had on the Kurdish community in Rojava, which we've seen again and again. And we have one of the biggest Kurdish communities here in Haringey. Thankfully, we didn't see protests, we didn't see any protests locally, but we have got a great relationship with the Kurdish community and continue to work with them. I know that Newroz is this week. Newroz is the Kurdish New Year, and we every year hold a massive festival in Finsbury Park, and we're working with the police colleagues as well to make sure there's reassurance patrols, which moves me on to the most recent tensions that we've been seeing. As all of you, the US and Israel attacks on Iran has escalated tensions in Iran, and now all of the Gulf and Levant region as well. And as I mentioned, there has, Haringey's got diverse community, and we know that the attacks that are happening at the moment will affect predominantly the Jewish and the Iranian and Muslim communities, but also Middle Eastern communities in general, the Turkish and Kurdish communities. We've got Palestinian communities and Lebanese and etc. So we're working with our mosques, our synagogues as well, for reassurance with the Prevent team as well, working closely with the resettlement team as well to make sure that we are reaching out to the Iranian community, and we're looking to create a space in one of the churches, a space where Iranian communities and residents can come and speak about current tensions and to really understand how it's affected, how we can support. Of course, that brings me on to reporting on Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and other hate crimes because of the international conflicts that we've seen over the past, I'd say, 3 to 4 months. Of course, we expect a rise in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We saw a huge dip over the last 6 to 8 months, I believe. Sandy would know better, but stats are showing since last summer that we had a decrease of reported hate crime. This isn't to say that hate crime doesn't exist and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and homophobia doesn't exist in our borough. That was a huge concern for us. And speaking to our residents, speaking to communities, we look to better understand the reasons for underreporting. But my observations and my communication activities have always been around the lack of trust, the experience that they've had previously, and just the minimalisation as well of day-to-day racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. I'll speak more locally. I know we've previously talked about detentions that we've seen in Markfield Park and the anti-Semitic graffiti. Since October 7th, the last few years now, we've seen an increase of graffiti within our borough, not just anti-Semitic graffiti, but Islamophobic as well. We've worked in partnership with our parks and waste colleagues, and they've been absolutely amazing with removing graffiti within 24 hours. However, in the last, I'd say, 10 months or so, we've seen a huge increase of anti-Semitic graffiti Markfield Park, and we have worked with ASD colleagues, CCTV, Coles teams to work on the park and to understand how we can better serve our communities, especially the Jewish community in the park. From November to about end of December, we saw that there was a decrease, especially after the deploying CCTV cameras in the park. So that was very useful. We didn't see a lot of, we saw actually zero anti-Semitic graffiti. However, since the Iranian attacks, the US and Israel attacks on Iran, in the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've seen a huge increase of anti-Semitic graffiti, not just in Markfield Park, but in the west of the borough as well. Again, we're working with our graffiti strategic group. We've got a meeting with them next week, which includes myself and the police and different partners as well to really address the issue. We've got some projects with our comms teams in Haringey, specifically targeting Markfield Park, and that will be confirmed in the next few days, I believe. We'll have more posters around the park to educate our residents and communities how to report hate crimes and graffiti as well, because it's through the app and through the police, it's very easy to report them. When we've spoken to our communities in the area, we can say, oh, we didn't know how to report. So that's really us targeting that. Just moving forward, I don't want to take too much time, but we'll continue to work closely with our communities in Haringey, especially through the Multi-Plate Forum, and we'll be liaising with all our groups that are affected from international, but also just day-to-day engagement as well. Through the Hate Crime Delivery Group, Community Tensions Group, our partnership work will really put the focus on hate crime action plan and work towards Hate Crime Awareness Week 2026, which will be in October. As usual, we start in April, but I look forward to working with the police closely this year to really target that third-party reporting, increase reporting, and they have worked with us closely in past years, but it'll be interesting to see how we can work with the police to understand the victims as well and their experiences, because that really ties into the underreporting aspect of it as well. And also we've worked with and we've had conversations with our faith leaders around third-party reporting that we would focus for. I'll end that there and have to take questions.
Currently, I was just wondering how we currently report. So when you've spoken to all these different data those groups of residents? Is there anything that they're saying that we should be doing that they feel we could be doing, but we're not?
We encourage everyone to report hate crimes specifically, so 101 through the website, so if they don't want to get called 101, then we encourage them to direct them to them. So that can be our number one route. It's usually better for the victim to be in contact with the police directly. We're here for other services, directness, also, etc. When speaking to communities, of course, it varies across different communities. To the Jewish community in the west of the borough, they say they would have an experience to the Orthodox Heren community in south area and other parts of the borough, and it's the same for the Muslim communities as well, and the Iranian community and the Christian community. I mean, it's one of the towards African and Caribbean communities, and that's something we can't deny. So I think the one thing that we took from Hate Crime Awareness Week last year, which was the October gone, was that communities and faith groups have really asked us to talk about third-party reporting and having hubs around the borough where communities who are trusted organisations to report hate crimes. A lot of the time we have residents that struggle with English as their first language, or they've had bad experiences, or they feel that they will be judged from community members if they were to report hate crimes. And the real way to do that is going to their church, for example, or their mosque, or their Buddhist church, where they can speak to someone that can report during still having those conversations, and it's not limited to that only, but for us to find out how we can support further.
Why is it Markfield Park where? Yeah, so are there any of the other parts?
I mean, we know that there is high volume of Jewish residents around the park, and speaking to Councillor Rossop as well, that has come to our attention. Hence why I would say it's targeted anti-graffiti, because when it first started, it was, we were assessing the situation to see if it's just if it was targeted, but understanding demographics around the park, we've got a high volume of Jewish residents. Shows that people are walking past, going through the park, going to the park with their children, and going to the high volume. And it shows that someone is targeting.
An observation. So anti-Israeli sentiment is actually captured as a hate crime, which I think there is a clear distinction, isn't there, between anti-Israeli government sentiment and anti-Semitism. Actually, I don't think as an organisation we're mature enough to be noticing the difference, but anti-Israeli government sentiment is contributing towards our reporting.
Just one observation, if the board could note the mitigation measures and to be reported back at the next meeting, but in particular, highlight the setting repeat victim prevalence. We don't know. I'm trying to understand. So, which is org. So this is submitted and I've translated the notes shortly. I don't know if Will or Chantal want to talk to this, or I can talk to it.
I'm happy to. So, in terms of highlights, so our board strategy is based around 4 areas. There's coordinated community response, which is how we fight together a community where we feel supported, where we feel supported, and then levels of safe things. There mention, which includes working in schools, provision of domestic violence advocates and other services, and working with perpetrators. To get some work there that's been highlighted. I think some of the areas of focus need to be on some of the more operational elements. So we've got to do the strategy, but there are some things from domestic side reviews, around the data that we've talked about as well, and how we link in our operational pathways as well. So I think a lot of the strategic work is really well focused on those pathways, and then just highlighting. I don't think there's really significant issues with our specialist services because we have a good range of specialist services, and then there's not going to be a service gap, but there's kind of potential. We've got some funding gaps if we want to improve our commissioning offer. Like that as a major sort of imminent risk to people in the borough. It's more that have to find a way of getting through for sort of the long term. And likewise, the MARAC, the multi-agency meeting to discuss cases which I mentioned successes in earlier. We're looking at procurement options, but we're also thinking about insourcing that into the council, which carries its own risks. And we can bring updates on. I do want to highlight on the really positive side, it's a bit of women who are sex working, particularly in that Edmonton or Thumb Park corridor. There's been a much stronger partnership working, led by Rob Gibbs from the police side. I don't know if it's probably not good with Chief Inspector Gibbs, and community policing teams, and the Operation Amicus, which is with women. And we're receiving some positive, which I think is really good. And then also a thank you to Mark and colleagues from my team who've set up a multi-agency panel pilot for women who sex work across Harringay. And we had our first meeting last month, which Mark chaired, and it was really positive to get all the partners around the table, and it was really well attended, actually sort of troubleshooting cases and working together positively. So a big thank you to Mark, and it's a bit of a work in progress. The other positive thing on the sex work front is there is a new project where we receive funding from the government, which is working with the voluntary organisation for all people places, now include key workers or women who sex works, and how short-term housing options. So I think we're building our capacity and offer.
I think much needed as well. I know that last week there was an operation, I think 2 women specifically approached the officers because they had about work going on to get themselves up. Any other question?
Just one observation and a very short note on the sways, but in relation to the MARAC, I do think that's an area of risk for the partnership to be aware of, probably quite feedback that's progressive. Because I'm making slight mix up, but I imagine 500 survivors go through that, they are at risk of harm. So it's also requires systems and processes. So I think it's right to keep setting partnership have oversight. Be sure to prevent that happens. Can I just do a very, very quick note about the sways? I'll just to importance. The verb version. So what was observed were, we discussed about 10 cases. I would suggest there were significant opportunities for ensuring that they are subject to oversight by statutory agencies contestable meeting. So that's been picked up as a theme for practitioners recognising. There was another thing to link into domestic abuse, that some of these women were controlled by partners. Yet the situation was not seen through the lens of domestic abuse. There were missed opportunities. So that was the MARAC, going back to the MARAC process. So the overall assessment is that need for a MARAC type of approach for this particular cohort. There are significant numbers in some of the Enfield area. We had stakeholders together. There were 30 professionals that came to the meeting, who contributed to the different interventions that you could say. There are some key stakeholders, which always includes the police. So again, Amicus, Jen has been particularly proactive and developed fantastic relationships across the project. I think we debunked some theories actually, didn't we, over the last, some stigma.
Yeah.
Getting there. It's really good relationships. And again, I think I'd probably invite the partner further up.
And a separate matter, Mark. So that you want to be a bespoke.
So it's within a 3-month pilot, basically. Go to serious violence. I'm mindful of time. Serious violence is. So I'm going to talk about the VRAP very briefly. Usually, a lot of the work regarding serious violence is overseen by Youth Justice. And there's a note in the chat, you may not have seen, that Jackie's thinking they might be subject to a J type of inspection about her approach to serious violence. Our casual observation would be that maybe didn't have a plan to, when the serious violence duty came in, that actually formulated a plan across all of the agencies. There's some fantastic work, and we can be better at coordinating activity. The VRAP, the Violence Reduction Action Plan from the Violence Reduction Unit, provides us an opportunity to reassess where we're at across all of those interventions or not. Pass over to Sandy.
Yeah, sure. I'll just put it on the screen here very briefly. In terms of what the VRAP is, that's the Violence Vulnerability Reduction Action Plan 2026. So essentially, this is the third iteration. Let's look at this next screen. The third iteration of the plan, which essentially is sent out by the London Violence Reduction Unit, and each London borough is required to provide a return by the end of April. Just for information, we've had the opportunity early on to feed into the structure of the VRAP and to actually influence what that looks like for London. So the final VRAP has had Harringay input into it before it's then gone out to London, which I think is really helpful in order for us to be a part of that conversation early on. So essentially, within the VRAP, we're required to respond against 8 different particular areas, which I'll run through very briefly just in a moment. But essentially, the aim of it is for us to be able to step back and essentially assess the effectiveness of our partnership response to serious violence. Some of the key things which the BOU hope to get out of it is to, for example, set clear standards for violence reduction, to strengthen collaboration, and also to provide and be able to capture best practice learning across London. So the idea is once each London borough submits their VRAP plan, then some feedback will be sent out to each borough, also collectively, so that we might want to look at and reflect upon a future community partnership in terms of where we're at with our journey on that way. So we've already spoken about strategic position, which is from the strategic assessment at the bottom of the screen there. But as I said, there are 8 areas in particular, and this will be circulated out to the group and to others for input. So hopefully you'll see this in your inbox before long. So hopefully come back with some responses to each of these actions. So the first area there is about governance, things like roles and responsibilities. And you'll know for each of these, there's a specific action that the BIU have listed, which is shown in the action column. We are then required to respond against the borough activity column to the right side of the screen there. So for some of those, there's some kind of holding information which we've gathered so far from community partners, but there'll be more required from everybody over the next few weeks into possible. So governance is the first section there, roles and responsibilities. Moves on then to analysis and enforcement, so things like disproportionality, data analysis and sharing, how we're kind of considering information sharing as a key part of our violence reduction approach. Thirdly, reducing access to weapons. So that could be things such as knives and our training standards work and what we're doing to make that area as safe as possible. Fourthly, and quite importantly, I think safeguarding and educating children and young people. So that includes things like inclusion charters, the transition from primary to secondary school, disproportionality and adultification, which again we know is an emerging area of concern. Also staying within the same theme, safeguarding online harms, also young people who need some non-education employment training. Theme number 5 is working with communities and neighbourhoods to reduce violence. So again, it's around community capacity building. So that's working with perhaps community leaders, but also finally within this category, trusted adults. Theme 6, supporting victims of violence and vulnerability. So you can see some of the themes there. I think this is where some partnership information would really feed in. So that's like things such as housing, modern slavery, support for care experience young people. 7, positive diversion. So that's, I think, where our youth service colleagues would come in particular, early intervention and diversion opportunities. And then number 8, tackling violence against women and girls, as we've already spoken of earlier today, things like tackling misogyny, supporting young women affected by exploitation, young children affected by domestic abuse, and also with safety, so particularly time economy space. So those are the 8 themes. This will be circulated, as I mentioned, to all colleagues. If you could look through the actions for that and contribute anything that your particular area of business is doing in the activity column. I will then be collating all of that together to have one single response, which we send through to the BIU ahead of the 30th of April.
It may be helpful if departments can nominate someone to lead part of their agency, and maybe just a wash-up session, cup of tea or coffee and cake in a room in a couple of weeks' time. I think that might be useful, as opposed to stuff flying across the ether to coffee and cake and try and but I really do think it's a real opportunity to, if you like, to assess what we're doing in our current situation, and that will help with the strategic assessment, what we have to do to continue the success in terms of serious violence. Okay.
Any other questions about any of those 4 areas? I'm aware of time as well. Okay. To statutory responsibilities. First up is the reduction of reoffending in young people and adults.
So this first of all, I think I've got it here.
Just for time, maybe it's best to highlight key headlines.
I'll be sure to do that. To prevent.
If it's okay, I'd like to cover some key things on Prevent. Just as an awareness for everybody, and it was in the sort of strategic assessment, referrals for Prevent nationally, London-wide are increasing. That's for the stats from last year, and this year is probably going to be even more higher than ever has been, and Haringey does reflect the London picture. So I just wanted to raise that as a concern. As something that goes alongside that, we've had a reduction in our funding for next year. Haringey is still the Prevent priority borough, but with a reduction in funding, reduction in capacity, we'll have to figure out how, as a community safety partnership, as a Prevent delivery group that we have as well, chaired by Jackie, that continues to be able to effectively support regularly. And in Haringey, we see referrals across the board. It's not one particular group. And I think it's important to note the work that we have done over the past few months with a reduced capacity. And we have been working very closely with the hate crime team around this. We did see the Manchester synagogue attack. Bondi Beach, as mentioned, is impacting issues around Iran, the US as well, and working with our faith group. But there is also a lot of positive work, positive with the channel panel that is ongoing. So I think it's just important to know, Prevent, in addition to the hate crime that we're seeing, there are risks that our young people are facing. We've got a new section on our action plan around online radicalisation risk because it cross-cuts the other section. And our priorities for the next quarter are going to be to support our community settings, our faith settings, our supplementary schools, our community groups around things like security training and support in that sense, because there is a sense of fear, not that communities can also be targeted or within Haringey as well. So there's 2 sides of it, but also making sure that training and that streamlining of prioritising for next year is done with the reduced capacity the team specifically is going to have. But of course, Prevent is a business as usual for the whole council. So making sure that there are clear actions. We are able to work with everybody around that. So just a kind of call and an update for everybody there. I just think it's what's happening nationally, internationally, in all forms of ideologies.
I think just to celebrate this, some new additions to take place within and highlighted the Schools Prevent Advisory Group, Youth Multi-Faith Forums, training regarding digital harms. I think that could be celebrated as a new activity that's being delivered, but also note the action, the mitigation that's required to be reported back to community safety partnership. So for me, that's around ensuring that the plan is developed this year, but also assess the implications of further funding cuts and potentially for making activity. We need to be reassured about what I need to flag it up.
Currently, we're exceeding in our Home Office benchmarks. whether that's something to keep an eye on for next year due to capacity.
Batting substance misuse. We get a report on a quarterly basis from the leads. Okay, and I've got observation sometimes the data around combating substance misuse is I say it's light, I don't understand it necessarily. It talks about the numbers going through the system and everything else. I think it's merits a deeper dive in the presentation of community safety partnership to understand how that links with all approach to conduct disorder. Thank you for that. Suggest a further deep dive. Watching through the time, give me. Reduction of reoffending, we touched on at the very start of the meeting, and there's some updates there in terms of, I say we're content regarding young people, really good intrusion, less good regarding adults. There are a number of particular cohorts to be concerned about potentially. That's the high harm, high demand, that touches on complex things, mental health issues, domestic abuse, repeat offenders, inquisitive offenders, substance misuse, limited offenders, and other vulnerable groups. In essence, there is a need for this strategic group to oversee certain elements of these cohorts. We need to ensure there's a ranked report dashboard. We need to understand the partnership, the oversight of integrated offender management. Doing analysis about the top offenders, question mark. Again, that touched on the work that Helen and I do about health. Demand profile will be ideal in the future. In summary, we are amber is my professional assessment, and we need to break this down to bite-sized chunks into an action plan. Site reduction, reoffending will first meeting took place. They want it. It's highly desirable, and colleagues from probation have recognised that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is.
I've been thinking about it quite a lot, because I think while we, in the policing world, while we deal with reoffending, we deal with it under the policing lens. Okay, they've reoffended again, let's get them in quickly. What we don't do is that we don't do that data overlap with the data wash to see why they're reoffending, and are we actually putting them through the right process.
To education, pathways to employment, pathways to housing. Yeah. The sick, I think
it
might be ensuring all of that's in place, and we're happy with that. Especially when we think about the folks being looked after or being housed in our borough.
And actually, we rely on them informing us what we don't actually have the data to understand and decide that for ourselves. So they can say it's because of mental health, but it might be because of drugs, or they can say it's because of drugs, but it might be because of mental poverty, it might be because of, cumulative trauma. Yeah, so it's an interesting area.
So that note can be endorsed and try to craft it in a way that we ensure we get a report back and feedback. Partnership funding, I'm not going to dwell on. There's a summary slide which will circulate in relation to partnership funding, which is all the. You see what a.
So, Mark, is it right if I just check? Is there any questions online for Mark on those three areas?
Partnership money, obviously VRU money, MOPAC money, LCPF money, Sandy coordinates all of the activity, all of the funding returns and so forth. What I would say is that even now we have got £190,000 for Seven Sisters. We're trying to spend more cameras for the locality, which is good news. I think it's 7 cameras or 8 cameras.
They're GoBo cameras.
No, and GoBo.
Okay.
So mixture of CCTV and GoBo lighting, which lights up the street with imagery and so forth.
Is that specifically for the high street or different locations?
So it's all around Seven Sisters. Generally, it's kind of located from around that where the Tesco's is through to around the station, quite a small geographic area. So I'd have the best bang for buck. So cameras, which we're trying to get installed before the end of financial year, bit of a tricky one, but I'm working on that. GoBo project, positive messages around CCTV and things like that. So those are in train. So hopefully we can get those up online next few weeks.
Any other business?
I've got 3.
Go on, Raj.
Sorry, and they are in the last 48 hours, I'd say. Schools, secondary schools, there's in an email to comments the schools talking about their reservations about withdrawal schools officers, the barriers and their feedback about breaking down intelligence barriers, responsiveness to issues that are arising within the schools. There's probably 2 or 3 others. And they'll probably see some reassurance as to education is being put in place to mitigate that loss in schools officers. Messenger, but I thought it was really important. That's played out here.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned it to me, and I said no, I'd like that to be raised here. So school officers have gone. It's nothing. So I did read the letter, and obviously it was very much. Can that be reviewed? Can't be reviewed. It's happened. Gone. We do have CYP officers in every ward, so 1 in every ward. Obviously that doesn't cover that it used to provide, but I do think, and I really want to sit down and see how we can develop working between ourselves, the schools, police, to use those CYP officers as productively as possible. At the moment, it feels like very much one-man band with Adam Lawton, trying to manage all of the head teachers, which A, doesn't feel like the right way to do things, and B, I think leaves out a huge chunk of people that should be involved in those conversations. It seems very much, Adam has got great communication with them, fantastic engagement, but then when Adam gets told the information, how does he then share that out? How does he then influence the other processes? So it's I've asked my inspector, Stephen Johnston Key, JK, to start looking at that and working on it. But I'd really like some feedback as to how we can actually start to develop this, because I do think, I absolutely agree. I think there's a huge intel back in then with our school officers going. We don't have sufficient resources to put back in to get the support that they used to have. I think the red v blue situation really highlighted, didn't it, where we have some risk that we need to look at. And actually, at the end of the day, the head teachers were relying very much on phoning yourself, phoning me. I'm on the train, getting a phone call early morning. It's not ideal. It's something that we really need to look at to see how we're going to support the schools.
Councillor Brabazon, Councillor Brabazon.
Yeah, I had a meeting with secondary heads yesterday, and they raised the issue about youth provision, and they said something which, of course, we all know for years, which is that the big gap is the 3:30 to 7 p.m. And we had a discussion about that because I think it's quite difficult to engage with schools. They are very, very individualistic and very inward looking because there's lots going on. And I think they assume that young people know everything that's going on, which they don't. Youth activity, for example. And it's always not easy to get a meeting with schools. So following on what you're saying, I think what might be quite useful is to have, I suggested that we had a sort of round table where we did bring the youth service and youth participation steered by children's services with the head teachers to have a much more open discussion about what's going on with relationships with youth and so on. And I think it would be quite useful to bring the police into that to get more of a handle, and actually to think of we have to work in a different way because the policemen aren't at school anymore. We haven't got the social workers in schools, but we do have a youth service which has some outreach and some really good outreach workers. We have some, we've got Haringey Learning Partnership, which does outreach and so on, a youth justice service. And I think we just need to put our heads together to start mapping a different way of relating. But they did accept that when people want to go to school, it's sometimes quite hard to get in. So that would be my suggestion, is that working with youth, we do facilitate a wider round table to see where we can build those stronger relationships. It's not just one way. The schools have to engage as well.
I mean, I know that the head teachers have a monthly meeting, don't they, all together? I know the same.
They do.
And we've had some discussion amongst ourselves as to whether or not it would be beneficial for us to attend those meetings in some capacity, or if we have a separate one.
I think we should organise a forum with them to talk about how the police and youth and external agencies can work more effectively with them, and that there's much more, much easier to and fro-in engagement.
Also,
That
I'm
would be
worried,
my feeling. And Jack is not here, but I can certainly talk to her about that. And Graham and I were at the meeting with the heads yesterday. Would that be helpful?
absolutely, yeah, I think.
I wonder whether we've got overlap here with our child safeguarding partnership arrangements. Right?
Yeah.
In terms of duplication of governance and oversight.
There is a risk of that without doubt,
Okay.
without doubt. And I suppose the question is whether you want to go separately or try and integrate into that. And I think it's such a valid point because we've discussed it previously in terms of safeguarding boards, children, adults, health and wellbeing, and community safety. And my view is they should come together and have an overall strategic view of stuff.
I think we should have a very practical discussion about those issues. But we need the heads, we need the schools at the table, and that it is a two-way street.
Perhaps the elegant solution here is asking the police, because this was about the police, if you like. I seek reassurance to the police as to how they will take the loss of schools officers. That enables this discussion to continue outside of this meeting and progress, and we can come back on that in 3 months' time. Reviewer's recommendation. And then is that okay to move on to that onto one other?
Yes, please. We've got 1 more minute left.
Dealt with Women's Safety Act, prevent and protect. I've got a meeting next week with Metropolitan Police regarding the implications, I suppose, of Martin's Law and the like. And I think that would need to come back as a discussion about governance and oversight of those elements. There'll be legislation that comes into place in relation to venues, venue hire and so forth. And it's certainly community safety business, but it's how that gets reported upon. So I suppose I'm recommending an action to myself really is to feedback to the Community Safety Partnership. Please stand in to get that position.
Anybody with any other business in the room? Hello? Any other business?
Leave just on time.
Is that bang on? About 3 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Yeah, yes.